Hi there, my name's Rachel. I am now on we are now on day 12 of the first lockdown of 2021. I am on day 2 of being out of isolation, although I'm not going up today. But I'm here to tell you that you are still not alone. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about mindful activities. So there's quite a lot of research about how activities such as knitting can be very, very good for our well-being and our mental health. And part of this is because it's a repetitive task. It's something that needs some attention. We're using both sides of our brains because we're using both hands, and we're actually creating something. I'm not a particularly proficient knitter, so when I knit I generally stick to scarves and squares and things like that, but there's something about the process of knitting that I really like. And so there's different ways that we can knit, and if you are a proficient knitter you might just get your knitting out and just click away whilst watching TV, so it stops being a particularly mindful exercise. What I'm going to suggest is that we make it a mindful exercise. So the first thing to do, if you have some knitting or something similar, is to get the wool and look at it. So I've got some white wool with bits of glitteriness in it. So look at it with a sense of beginner's mind, like you have never seen this before. Maybe really appreciate how it catches the light. Maybe notice how, like, the different colours in it. So when I look a little closer, so it's not just glittery, it's actually pink flecks that in certain lights look a little bit green. So I don't think I'd even realised that before I looked a bit closer. Then notice how it feels, maybe give it a squidge. So notice the feel of the wool. And then pick up your sticks, needles, brain fog, and just notice how it feels just to hold them. And notice the movement and the sound and the feel as you start to knit. So I'm putting the needle in, putting the wool round, bringing it through and off. In, around, through and off. There is a way of doing it without letting go of the needles, but I haven't figured that out yet. So as you're doing that, you might notice the feel of the tension of your knitting. You might notice the sound of the needles against one another. You might notice how your hands feel as you're moving. And you might notice how you feel. So maybe noticing, hopefully, a sense of calm. You might notice if you start getting into a sense of striving. So aiming to finish a row before a certain time, do a certain number of rows before you can put your wool down. So notice what's happening for you, noticing where your attention is. Maybe notice if you become distracted by thoughts. And see what happens if you just knit. So rather than knitting whilst watching telly or listening to music, just knitting. So what I'm noticing is I'm knitting in silence, and yet I can hear the clock. I can hear traffic outside. I like the feel of when you're just straightening up the wool. And then moving on to the next row. So I'm just doing plain knitting, which will result in garter stitch. So this doesn't involve a huge amount of thinking, so I don't need to think about whether I'm doing knit one, purl one or anything like that. I'm just focusing on how it feels. And you might also start to notice how your breathing feels. Notice your posture. And if you've got reasonably big needles, you'll probably find that your knitting grows quite quickly. I might make this into a blanket when it's finished. So there's a sense of satisfaction, even with something simple, that you're starting to build up. Something. And as you're knitting, you might also just connect with, well, I think there's a sense of connection when we knit. So, where did this wool come from? What's it made of? And how did it come to be as neat as this? So, I don't even know what kind of wool this is, but is it something synthetic? Is it something natural? Certainly there's some synthetic fibres in the glitter. So we might just wonder. And I think there's something kind of in the history of knitting when we think about, who first figured out that you could shear a sheep and then turn that through spinning and various processes into long strands of wool. And then who figured out that there was a particular way of essentially just knotting it together to create something. There's almost a kind of mystical process that goes on. And it has a very soothing and calming effect. So you might not be a knitter, but you will have another creative outlet. Lots of people say to me, I am not creative. And I honestly believe that every one of us is creative. We're not all artists, but we are all creative in some way. Maybe we're creative because we can cook a good meal. Maybe we can make a meal out of the random things lying around the fridge, and we can make something really tasty in 20 minutes. That's creative. Maybe we're creative because we can put together a really nice outfit. And even if you're not going anywhere, I think that's still an important thing to do. Maybe you're creative because you like to paint, and you might never show your paintings to anyone, but it's still creative. So you don't have to have an A in art to be creative. Being creative is just a really important part of being human, and it's a part that we often neglect. So find a way of being creative, or celebrate the creativity that you already have. And also see if you can find an activity that you do regularly and do it with more awareness. So bring a sense of mindfulness to the tactile nature of something that you do. So it might be really noticing how it feels when you take a shower. It might be really noticing how it feels to go for a walk. And it might be really noticing how it feels to knit. So anything can be a mindful activity if you bring awareness to it. And we all are creative. And I think one of the lovely things about lockdown, because there are some aspects of lockdown that are positive, one of those things is that we're finding our own bits of creativity that we didn't know that we had. And I think that's really important. So this is my little bit of creativity today. I think that might make somebody quite warm one day. So find your creativity, find your mindful moments, and remember, you're not alone. Bye.